What is one of the #1 justifiable complaints that Democrats make about Trump? That he lies. Well, last night, Joe put on full display his own uncomfortable relationship with the truth. Of course, this should have been readily apparent already, given that in recent weeks he invented and retold an apparently completely fabricated tale of getting arrested while trying to see Nelson Mandela.
Joe Biden has recently been telling voters that he was once arrested trying to see Nelson Mandela in South Africa in the 1970s when he was already a sitting U.S. senator.
On at least 3 separate occasions, that he was arrested in South Africa during apartheid. Watch this.
This day, 30 years ago, Nelson Mandela walked out of prison and entered into discussions about apartheid. I had the great honor of meeting him. I had the great honor of being arrested with our UN ambassador on the streets of Soweto trying to get to see him on Robben's Island.
One of the most saintly guys I ever knew, because I got arrested trying to see him when I went down to South Africa. Nelson Mandela.
I came back from South Africa trying to see Nelson Mandela and getting arrested for trying to see him on Robben's Island. He was in prison.
But tonight, the New York Times reviewed all available records and can't find any evidence of that arrest actually happening.
Man, this is not a good look for Biden. Because remember, first, he falsely claimed he marched in the civil rights movement. Now he's making up a story about getting arrested in apartheid South Africa. It's weird.
Well, Biden's own 2007 memoir never mentions being arrested in South Africa trying to see Nelson Mandela, and someone who was traveling with him at the time doesn't remember it either.
It's a lie. Biden himself was forced to fess up on CNN.
I guess I wasn't arrested, I was stopped.
To be clear, he didn't misspeak, he didn't misremember, it wasn't a gaffe, it was a lie. And a really bad one, because he even claimed at one point last month that Mandela later thanked him for getting arrested.
No one has yet to bother asking him about it in a debate, but I'm sure if Bernie had done something similar, they'd have given him a pass too. Am I right?
And we know Trump won't give Biden a pass. He'll use Biden's lies against him, even though Trump is a big liar. And that will demotivate many people out of voting for Biden in the general election. And Biden will lose. We can avoid that by voting for Bernie in the Democratic primary.
The establishment is now putting all of their eggs in the Biden basket. How's that going to go?
When I marched in the civil rights movement, I marched with tens of thousands of others to change attitudes.
When I was about the age of the guy standing over there, I got involved in the civil rights movement. You know, when I was a teenager in Delaware, for real, I got involved in the civil rights movement.
I was not an activist. I worked at an all-black swimming pool in the east side of Wilmington, Delaware. I was involved. I was involved in what they were thinking, what they were feeling. I was involved, but I was not out marching. I was not down in Selma. I was not anywhere else.
More than once, advisors had gently reminded Mr. Biden of the problem with this formulation. He had not actually marched during the civil rights movement, and more than once, Mr. Biden assured them that he understood, kept telling the story anyway. That is really, really weird.
And it's really, really wrong for Biden to lie about that. Meanwhile, Bernie doesn't have to lie.
54 years ago, you were in the front lines of trying to desegregate school housing at the University of Chicago. You were even arrested.
We were corralled by the police and told not to cross a line. Well, some of us did cross that line. And, of course, we were arrested. And we spent that night in jail until we were bailed out in the morning by the NAACP. As a student at the University of Chicago in the early 60s, I became involved with a civil rights organization called the Congress on Racial Equality, CORE. Being audacious young people, black and white, our chapter of CORE wanted to expose the racist housing system run by the university. We sent white couples and black couples into the university-owned housing to pretend that they were looking for an apartment. When the black couples showed up, there were just no apartments available. But a few hours later, when one of our white couples went in to look for an apartment, somehow, mysteriously, they found a choice of apartments. After documenting that clear pattern of racial discrimination, the students in CORE demanded that the university desegregate its housing. When they refused, we staged one of the first ever civil rights sit-ins in the North. The reason I tell you all of this is because my activities here in Chicago taught me a very important lesson that I have never forgotten. And that is that whether it is the struggle against corporate greed, against racism, sexism, homophobia, environmental devastation, or war and militarism, real change never takes place from the top on down. It always takes place from the bottom on up.
Injustice is something that I have always fought throughout my life.
The younger generation now tells me how tough things are. Give me a break. No. I have no empathy for it. Give me a break.
But in last night's debate, time and again, rather than grappling with uncomfortable past votes and positions, he just lied. Most notably, of course, Biden once again lied about his record on Social Security. Let's watch.
And I want you just to be straight with the American people. I am saying that you have been on the floor of the Senate time and time again talking about the need to cut Social Security, Medicare, and veterans programs. Is that true or is that not true?
No, it's not true.
Over decades, Joe Biden has repeatedly sought cuts to Social Security. We can also, as Senator Sanders suggested last night, go to the YouTube and see Joe in his own words.
When I introduced the budget freeze years ago, the liberals in my party said, "It's an awful thing you're doing, Joe. You are all the programs we care about. You're freezing them. Money for the blind, the disabled, education, and so on." And my argument then is the one I make now, which is the strongest, most compelling reason to be for this amendment or an amendment. And that is that if we don't do that, all the things I care most about are going to be gone. I mean, whatever happened to that old conservative discipline about paying for what you spend? I'm up for re-election this year, and I'm going to remind everybody what I did at home, which is going to cost me politically. When I argued that we should freeze federal spending, I meant Social Security as well. I meant Medicare and Medicaid. I meant veterans benefits. I meant every single solitary thing in the government.
But there was so much more on that bad bankruptcy bill that Joe now swears he barely had anything to do with, and he certainly didn't help write. Here is Republican Senator Orrin Hatch thanking Biden for helping to write the bill.
Senators Biden and Carper have worked tirelessly for years on this legislation, and they've taken some tough votes to get it done, and I admire them for it. You would expect senators from Delaware, which is the corporate state, to do their best to get this bill through, but they did.
On abortion, Joe claimed to be a longtime pro-choice champion. Well, here is a press release from Joe, literally bragging about being one of the Senate's most conservative Democrats because of his stance on the terrible balanced budget amendment, which would have, again, forced Social Security cuts, but also bragging about his support of anti-choice legislation. On the rather significant issue of the Iraq War, Biden continued his embarrassing parade of lies. He still insists that he thought by voting for the war, he was somehow voting against the war.
They were, in fact, producing nuclear weapons or weapons of mass destruction. They were not. And what's the first thing that happened when we got elected? The President Obama turned to me and said, "Get those troops out of there." I was responsible for getting 150,000 combat troops out of Iraq. I admitted 14 years ago was a mistake to have trusted him.
He also continues to lie about how quickly he turned on that war. Well, after the war began, he continued to stand by his vote, as you can also easily verify by going to the YouTube. On issue after issue, rather than owning up to what has been a lifelong record of atrocious judgment, Biden chose instead to shade, embellish, and flat out lie. He claimed he was responsible for the Paris Climate Accord. He was not. Remember when he took credit for the CFPB with Elizabeth Warren literally standing right there? He said he supports ending all new fracking. He does not. He claimed to have long supported the $15 minimum wage. The evidence, highly questionable. There were so many moments that did Biden started trending on Twitter, followed by lying Biden. The long list I've just detailed isn't even close to complete. The whole thing honestly just makes me sad. Democrats have put Biden in a position to win the nomination because they believe that nothing but beating Trump matters, and they believe Biden is most likely to defeat him.
The argument over which candidate's policy platform best serves America is the right argument to have during a primary. But the much bigger argument, or the one that I see more often, is that Sanders is sure to be an electoral disaster. He's going to be George McGovern all over again. He's going to get annihilated. And I am just here to tell you that the evidence we have, to the extent we have evidence about an unknowable future, just does not support that at all. I mean, I spend all day looking at this stuff. I would love to know the future, as we all would. We can't know the future. All we can do is just look at some of the evidence that we have. And I'm telling you, it's not in the data. It just isn't. Here are the head-to-head matchups between President Trump and the Democratic presidential candidates. He is consistently, in poll after poll after poll, at or near the top of all of them, while the candidates who are characterized often as more electable are lower. Sanders has higher favorability ratings than any other Democratic presidential candidate in the field. His campaign has raised more money. His campaign's cash on hand in the latest FEC filing more than double the other non-billionaire candidates, and his ability to raise money is not nothing when it comes to electability and possibly $1 billion being dropped on his head. If you can point me the data that we have where Sanders is 7 points behind in head-to-head matchups with Trump, I think there'd be real reason to worry. But it's just not what the data says. If you don't like Bernie Sanders because you don't think he would be a good president, then that's your choice. You should act on that as a citizen. But if you are freaking out because he is so obviously an electoral disaster, I'm here to tell you it's just not what the information that we have now suggests. It's not in the data. It just isn't.
And let us create a government and an economy that works for all of us, not just the 1%. Thank you very much.